We're taking a short detour just before completing that trifecta of standard UI requirements of sorting, filtering, and finally we're about to add paging, right? But before we do that, I'm adding this little bit of a detour here in response to several students have emailed asking the same basic question. With the project about to be due and handed in, they're asking if they're allowed to add their own touches to the styling of the UI itself. Now, let me please emphasize this right away. This course is all about the functionality of our application, and I don't normally worry in any way, shape, or form during this course about the actual styling, and there will be no marks whatsoever for styling during this entire course, right? But to satisfy the curiosity and the design requirements that students obviously are expressing here, I just want to talk about the fact that we are using Bootstrap CSS. Okay, it's a standard open source framework. It's working very nicely for us, and away we go. But it is not the be all and end all on its own. In fact, one of the advantages of using something like Bootstrap is it is so wildly popular out there as an open source styling tool, right? So there are other sites as well, but I want to draw your attention. If you really want to use some styling with CSS, again, this is not required at all, but for those that are curious, I might suggest you have a look at this there's a number of other sites as well, but I really like this one, totally open source, okay, this bootswatch, okay, .com. Essentially, it's a collection of themes. Now, they also have some paid themes, which makes sense because they've got to pay the bills somehow as well. But, sorry, I don't know why it's taking so long here. Yeah, I'm online, okay. Okay, that was a little strange. All right, maybe my internet's acting up on me, but there's all these free themes. You can get to them in a number of ways. You can sample, get an idea of what they look like, and so on. I'm going to use one here, I think, just because it's so wildly different from what we have right now. So I'm just going to preview it here. But let me just demonstrate how easy it is, if this is something you're interested in doing, to actually grab these. The instructions make it clear, but all you really need to do with our projects, with our ASP.NET MVC projects, is grab these two files, the Bootstrap CSS and the minimized version, right? I think you could almost get away with just the minimized version. I've never tested it because I think it's best practice to always grab both and just download them. And where do we put them? Well, let me come back here to Visual Studio for a second and kind of remind you a bit of what we did earlier. Remember in the www root folder, right? We talked about that this is basically the web UI aspect of our application. We have our own site CSS file. Remember, we added our own JavaScript file here, right? But under LIB for library, okay, here's Bootstrap. Here's the distribution of Bootstrap. And here we had CSS and JavaScript. So here in the CSS itself, right, here's where we have our Bootstrap files, and that's where we would need to add it. So I have to stop running to do this, otherwise the files might be locked. But if I right-click here, all I have to do is, once I've downloaded them, and say Add Existing Item. I could even try downloading them into this folder, I suppose, but this is what I normally do. Add Existing Item, okay? And I've got a few of them downloaded here. So there's the original ones I have just so I can go back and forth. And here are the ones from that particular morph theme. So I'm just going to add both of those. Yes, yes. Overwrite them, and away we go. So let's just see the effect now. Now, sometimes you have to go Control F5 to tell it to refresh everything, including the CSS. But look, there it is working already. If we can see the different colors and fonts. If I come here to Doctors, you can see how things do look quite different. Especially here, if I come in, I do kind of like this 3D effect of the input controls and so on, right? I can still have all the same functionality, okay, if I want to save changes there. Right, come back in here, create new, and you can see, right, my validation. Everything's still working the way I would like, right? But it's a very, such an easy way to change the overall look and feel, play around with all the different themes, and away you go. But here's a bit of a gotcha, okay? Earlier on, when I was using the column headings here, making them into buttons for an effective approach to my sorting, filtering, and paging idea, right? I don't really care for this much, do I? This does no longer look like a column heading. They definitely clearly look like buttons. So let's just remind ourselves of what we did here. What I did is I added this class button link to make them look like links as a nice column heading that I could click on to resort the column. Hey, with the original Bootstrap, it worked just fine. I was a little bit of a, well, should I say, in a hurry or was I lazy? And I quickly found that this was very similar in the look without it being a clickable link. So that's what I used for the column headings where I didn't want to be able to click on to sort, right? Actually, it was a pretty poor choice in hindsight here, and I can see that now because this one is actually made for whole collections of toolbar items and so on and so forth. But anyway, bottom line is I'm not happy with, when I've changed that theme, with how this looks, right? So how could I get around that issue? Well, remember we did do some customization here in my site CSS earlier, right? I found that I like to have a bit of more of a bottom margin to all of my form groups, okay? And then what the latest version of Bootstrap was giving me. So I added this little bit to my site CSS so I can override. Okay, we are not encouraged, generally speaking, to go into the actual distribution files for Bootstrap and make changes there, right? For obvious reasons, because we might just replace the whole thing. Instead, make your customizations in your own site files, right? So that's what I'm about to do here. I'm going to just grab this code out of that copy-paste file I showed you a moment ago, which I'll have up in Brightspace shortly, right? Now, one thing, as I said, this is not a CSS course here, right? We're totally focused on functionality, but I can't share this with you without giving some explanation. Yeah, I can override button link, for example, right, with my own styling. And really what I'm doing here is I'm pretty much putting it back as close as I could figure out to the original styling that there was with the stock Bootstrap file that we originally had as we scaffolded our project, right? But I don't want to override it everywhere because there might be spots where the theme would want to use this styling, okay, in the normal way. Remember, I'm kind of stealing, okay, this approach for my particular use as a column heading, right? So what I want to do is I want to make it a scoped override, you might say. Now, the phrase I use here, I could use anything I want. I could say Fred eats fish on Fridays, right, as the name for this, right? But, you know, that wouldn't make sense. So I think scoped Bootstrap, okay, is a bit more of a common sense thing to say here. So within a given scope, wherever I actually have a region of HTML surrounded by this class, scope Bootstrap, then if I have a button link, okay, inside that, it will override the whatever theme I have and put this styling in place, right? Now, let me get back to my discussion of this one here, the button toolbar. I said, in hindsight, not the best choice. Well, what I've found works better here, actually, is this one, button link, disabled link, okay? So that gives me, I think, a very effective column heading to work in parallel to my button link, okay, inside this scoped area that I'm going to create, right? Okay, so that's good. So I have that in my site CSS now. I'm going to basically revert, you might say, to the original Bootstrap styling for links that are contained in this area. So how do I get that in place here? Well, essentially what I have to do is I'm going to use the whole row, right? So for the row, I'm going to say, hey, my class is going to be my scoped Bootstrap. My copy paste. Control C, Control V. How hard can it be, Dave? Well, I messed up, okay? Let me get it again. Right. So now within the region of this row, I'm going to be applying everything inside my scope Bootstrap. So my button links will now get my override here. What I have here, overriding the themes button link styling, right? Now for these ones, okay, I don't like the button toolbar effect. It's not going to work for me. So what I'm going to do is instead put in this class, okay, referring to my disabled styling. So for medical trial and for history, right? Okay, so let's run this again now with these changes in place. All right, finally. Okay, now when I come to patients, there we go. That looks a lot better. So now I have, you know, I can click these, they're doing what they want, but they also look like what I want. But I haven't overridden it everywhere. Just wherever I want to, I can just wrap the whole div or whatever it is with my scoped-bootstrap, and then now I'm getting the look that I'm after. A final thing, I threw it in my copy-paste file. You know, because these are I have them defined as submit buttons, but they aren't, right? They're just column headings essentially. So one other change I could make here, and it's in my thing, is I could just make it a span instead, but applying the same styling, okay, gives me the effect that I want. So let me just come down here, say for the history, I can get rid of it being an input altogether. Since I'm not going to be clicking on it anyway, I can just make it a span with that exact same class and then just say whatever I want. So medical history or medical trial, whatever, right? I'll just put medical trial in here. Okay, so just do a hot reload. And there we are. So it gives me the exact same, pretty much. It might be a tiny bit higher, but I think it's okay. I mean, whether you want to use the input type equals submit or the span makes very little difference to me. But the overall look here now is safe. It doesn't matter what theme I download. I should pretty much get this constant look to my column headings, and away I go. So, you know, if you want to play around with themes, just a few tips and tricks for you as you do it, right? Okay, hopefully you found that at least interesting, maybe even helpful.